Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We take a look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern, and try to figure out how to use them in our own lives to improve our position. And done 300 so videos on the ancient Egyptian tree of life, almost 600 videos on Dewey Larson's reciprocal system of theory. And we're just starting out here reading from the American Buddhist Daniel Ingram's book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And this is part of a unit that we're going to be doing kind of on syncretic religion, trying to shore up some of the holes in the Western traditions to make it a little bit more viable. Both Christianity and Judaism have a lot of psyop problems kind of going on, and the people that populate those religions, I think, have done a great job in terms of being intuitive and recognizing that they smell a rat within their own scriptures, and they come up with reasons for kind of ignoring various parts. But I think that there are other traditions out there that would be more helpful in kind of filling in the holes. And I think this is a great book here, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, because it's an American who is putting a lot of ancient wisdom in esoteric and foreign and ancient languages into a language that we can understand. He's done a lot of digging, mostly digging in his own personal experience through meditation. And so that's kind of, this book is, about the different states of consciousness that you get into in deep meditation. And not only about that, there's elements about morality and ethics, and also psychological neurosis, things like that. But we are in the introduction of this book, and we're going to start right here. I read part of this paragraph last time out, but didn't really get it finished, so we're going to go back. In this same pragmatic vein, there has arisen a global movement inspired by numerous things and promoted by many people, now often referred to as the pragmatic Dharma movement, which I hope one day will be called something more welcoming to those allergic to words such as Dharma. This movement can be characterized as embracing a worldview that includes the following ideas. We can improve the way our minds function and the way they perceive and process reality in numerous skillful ways. And what works is key. Specifically, it doesn't matter at all where you draw useful things from if they are effective, meaning that they provide the specific benefits sought. Very true. And I think that in the Western traditions, they put up this facade of Satan, and so they are repelled by other ways of doing spirituality because they contend that they're satanic or evil or something, and they're not using resources that would be there to help them. innovating by extracting key useful elements from various traditions and combining things to come up with something that works for you is encouraged, as is pursuing traditional goals in traditional ways, as long as the approach works. This book follows the general approach while refraining from being dismissive of elements of great value from the old traditions. Part 1 contains some traditional lists that were taught by the Buddha and relate directly to spiritual training. They make important and practical points in very concise ways. These teachings were presented succinctly on purpose so that people could remember them and use them. It is their very simplicity that makes them so practical and down to earth. However, I'm going to take these very condensed teachings and go on and on about them. It turns out that the Buddha sometimes made things so simple that we, 2,500 plus years later, are left wondering what he was talking about and how to apply his teachings to our lives. Still, it is amazing that his teachings are still so relevant to our lives today. These teachings are designed to help people get in touch with their reality in some way that makes a difference. They can also help people avoid some of the common pitfalls on the spiritual path and in life in general, some of which I will talk about later. The Buddhist teachings are also designed to help people develop along some of the nearly infinite axes of development. By axes of development, I mean all the ways we can improve our mind, body, and world. Since this is an endless undertaking, in this book we will focus on a relatively few very specific ones. As the book goes along, I will introduce various things that we can practice, experience, gain insight into, develop, and modify that make a positive difference. Chapter 1, called The Three Trainings, introduces morality, concentration, and wisdom. These three trainings encompass the sum of the Buddhist path: morality, concentration, and wisdom. Thus, as is traditional, and for good reason, they will be used as the conceptual framework for this book. And he refers to this reading called The Long Discourses of the Buddha. The three trainings involve skills that we consciously and explicitly try to master. Each training has its own specific set of premises, goals, practices, and standards of mastery for those practices. These are different from each other, and problems can arise if we conflate the premises of one training when pursuing the others. Each training also has its common pitfalls, limitations, and shadow sides, which are rarely made clear, and failure to do so has caused much confusion. Thus, I will do my best to make them clear, particularly in Part 2, called Light and Shadows. The specific standards for success and mastery can sometimes seem a bit technical, particularly the maps of the high concentration states and the stages of insight. So I will wait until parts 3 through 6 to present these, to keep part 1 focused on the basic framework and practices that make the whole thing possible in the first place. While I think that each part of this book contributes to the whole, there are reasons you may want to skip to certain sections first and fill in the rest later. For instance, if you are having powerful visions or Kundalini experiences, you might want to read the first few chapters of Part 4 and then go back and read the rest. If you are simply interested in the maps of the stages of insight, go straight to the chapter called The Progress of Insight. If you just want to get right to some core insight practices, read the chapters on the 3 characteristics and the 7 factors of awakening. Should you be in a mood for some social commentary, the beginning of part 2 is for you. If you just want to hear my take on awakening, then models of the stages of awakening might be a good place to start. That said, skipping sections is likely to lead to misunderstandings, as plenty of sections that are not close to each other are yet designed to counter excesses that could arise from some other section being read on its own. I struggled for a long time over whether to present at the beginning or at the end of the book the maps that detail what these practices lead to. I've included them at the end, but you might be the sort who wants to see them first. And if so, firstly, you should read the chapter called The 3 Characteristics, and then skip to part 3. Okay, that is the end of the introduction. The chapter 2 is called Morality, the first and last training. The original Pali word for this training is sita. I believe that's what it says. S-I-T-A. Which I am translating as morality. People translate it in various ways. Regardless of the word we choose, it is likely to resonate for people both positively and negatively. If the word morality bothers you due to associations it suggests, look at the assumptions, agendas, and practices of this training and come up with your own word for it. I don't think that it is so important what we call it. I do, however, think that we should give careful attention to trying to live it. From my perspective, training in morality has as its domain all the physical, verbal, and mental behaviors belonging to every single aspect of life that is not explicitly meditative. When we are trying to live a good life in the conventional sense, we are working on training in morality. When we are trying to work on improving our physical, emotional, and mental health, we are training in morality. When we philosophize, we are training in morality. When we exercise, we are training in morality. When we are taking care of others or ourselves, we are training in morality. When we try to guard the environment by not misusing or wasting resources, reform corrupt governments, or make the world a better place for everyone, we are training in morality. When we commit to a non-harming and benevolent livelihood, building a healthy marriage, raise healthy children, or shave our heads and move to a remote place and dedicate ourselves to intensive spiritual practice, we are training in morality. Whatever we do in the ordinary world that we think will be of some benefit to others and ourselves is an aspect of working on this first training. I should add a qualifier here relating to what a life well lived might mean. For some, that is a life of riches, decadence, and hedonism. That is not what I'm talking about. It is not that wealth is inherently bad, though there are strong moral arguments to be made for a vastly more equitable distribution of wealth. It is not that all decadence is inherently bad, and I would hate to make someone feel terrible for having a second dessert occasionally. But clearly, there is a great deal of spending on luxury that is contributing to the destruction of the planet and behavior that simply leads to more misery for all concerned in the name of fun. It is not that we shouldn't enjoy our lives, as an enjoyable life is a much easier one to accept, but clearly plenty of the pathways people go down seeking enjoyment do predictably lead to more suffering than they produce pleasure or fulfillment. So, with those qualifiers in mind, ponder what a life well lived would mean and aspire to that. The third training, called wisdom, as understood within the Theravada framework, has limits in that you can only take it so far, and it can be fully mastered. Interestingly, this cannot be said of the first two trainings of morality and concentration. There is no limit to the degree of skill that can be brought to how we conduct ourselves in the world. There are so many ways we can develop, and no obvious ways to define what 100% mastery of even one of these might be. Thus, morality is also the last training, in the sense of being the training we need to cultivate throughout our lives. We may be able to attain two extraordinary states of consciousness and understand many aspects of the actual nature of sensate reality. But what people see and what is causal, are the ways that these abilities and understandings translate into how we live in the world. Some folks who read Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, Volume 1, or Edition 1, for reasons I am unsure of, came away with the mistaken impression that I somehow consider morality as unimportant. Let me now be completely clear on this. Morality cultivated through our entire lives is critical for everyone, and particularly for those who want to train in concentration and wisdom. There are basic premises that are extremely helpful when undertaking training in morality. It is very helpful to accept, for example, that a basic moral code, that is, a universal and non-harming ethic, is helpful for getting along in this world, and thus that there is practical, real-world benefit to be derived from training in morality. It is also helpful to accept an easygoing and non-dogmatic way that the more good we do in the world, the more good there will appear in that world, both for us and for others. And thus, the more good things will happen to us and all others. It is also worth assuming the corollary of this, which is that the more we do harmful actions in the world, the more harm we experience, and therefore the more that miserable circumstances arise. These premises are not unique to Buddhism, nor are they in any way extraordinary. And that brings me to an important point about the spiritual traditions in general. Most religions have points that are generically useful that they have attempted to appropriate as exclusively theirs, such that extremist followers of that faith may come to believe that their tradition's teaching on morality is the only teaching on morality. The corollary of this fallacy is that people not of their own religion are considered unlikely or incapable of being truly moral, when in fact societies and traditions throughout the ages and around the world have advocated for a universal, non-harming ethic. It is worth realizing that defining negative and positive action is often very much a question of perspective. In the face of this, some will retreat into the semi-dysfunctional and often self-serving position of moral relativism, in which we decide that morality is totally subjective or that morality is arbitrary and thus futile or unnecessary to bother with. Paradigms that are less intellectual and more grounded in common sense can help us to avoid falling into the paralyzing and extremely dangerous trap of imagining that it is futile to train in morality. However seemingly relative and arbitrary, it is better to try to do our best and fail than not to try at all. Thus, the Buddha taught that what we think, say, and do has consequences for our subsequent moment-to-moment experience. When undertaking training in morality, we are proceeding from the premise that we can, if we choose, control what we think, say, and do, thus creating consequences that are pleasant and beneficial, both in terms of our experience and that of others. Rather than accepting our current level of intellectual, emotional, and psychological development as being beyond our power to change, we consciously and explicitly adopt the empowering view that we can work with these aspects of our lives and change them for the better. We assume that we do have the capacity to change our world and our attitudes toward our world. We take responsibility for our actions and their consequences. Further, as a part of our empowerment, we assume that the more we bring our resources and abilities to this training, the likelier we are to succeed. We have a body, we have reason, we have our intuition, we have our heart, and we can learn and remember. We have a community of others who have wisdom to share. We have books and other media that contain advice for living a good life. And we have our friends and family. We can draw on all these and more to try to live a good life, a life in which our thoughts, words, and deeds reflect as closely as possible the standards we have consciously adopted and defined for ourselves. The more consciously engaged we are with our task, the more we are likely to be successful. Crucial to the control of what happens in our lives is our intention. Thus, training in morality places much emphasis on intention, with the basic assumption being that the more our intentions are kind and compassionate, the more we are likely to be able to manifest kind and compassionate thoughts, words, and deeds. Further, it is helpful to understand that training in morality requires us to pay attention to what is happening in our lives. When we are not paying attention to what we are thinking, saying, and doing, we will not easily be able to craft these in a way that fits with the assumptions of this training. If we are not paying attention to the consequences of our thoughts, words, and deeds, both in the short and the long terms, we are unlikely to be able to gain enough experience to be able to successfully carry out our training in morality. It is also helpful to understand that training in morality will help us when we get to formal meditation practices, which are in the next two trainings in concentration and wisdom. Providing a foundation of good mental and physical habits that can support those practices, as well as helping to avoid the mental and physical irritation that can result from a lack of a solid moral foundation. Thus, even if for some crazy reason we have little interest in being moral because of the benefits it brings, if we are interested in obtaining the results of the other two trainings, we must also engage in training in morality. These key points about training in morality naturally lead to the specific agendas we have for what happens when undertaking training in morality. We consciously aspire to have the actions of our body, speech, and mind fit with the premises or prerequisites of this training. In short, we have standards for our mental, emotional, and physical lives, and we try our best to live up to those standards. When we are training in morality, we consciously cultivate actions, words, and thoughts that we deem to be non-harming. and, if possible, kind and compassionate. By kind, I mean that we work to promote the happiness and welfare of others and ourselves. By compassionate, I mean that we work to understand and relieve the suffering, problems, or unhappiness of others and ourselves. Thus, our agenda is for our intentions to be kind and compassionate, for our minds to be aware of what we are thinking, saying, and doing, and for our experience to inform us how best to craft our life to reflect our wisely informed good intentions. Training in morality tends to be discussed in terms of what we should and shouldn't do. The standard Buddhist short list of the 5 actions that practitioners should refrain from doing are referred to as the 5 precepts: killing, stealing, lying, taking intoxicants, and leading to heedlessness and sexual misconduct, which includes such actions as cheating on a partner or using sexuality in a harmful way. These are not unique to Buddhism and seem to be part of the basic set of standards for behavior that societies and cultures throughout the ages have found to be helpful and practical. The standard list of things that we should try to do includes being kind, compassionate, and appreciative of the successes of others. Additionally, in the Karamiya Metta Sutta, we find the following advice, quote, "Those who are skilled in good and wish to attain the state of peace should be able, upright, perfectly upright, compliant, gentle, and humble, contented, easily supported, of simple livelihood, with few duties, controlled in senses, discreet, not impudent. They should not be carried away by the emotions of the majority. They should not commit any slight wrong, such that the wise ones might censure them." End quote. The rest of the sutta is also very worthy of reading and practicing. Wrestling with the question of how we can meet these standards and yet honor where we are and what is going on around us is the training in morality. We will make all kinds of mistakes that can be very educational when trying to work on this first training. If you mess up, remember to be gentle with yourself. There are many great techniques for cultivating a more decent way of being in the world, but there are no magic formulas. You must figure out how to be kind to yourself and all beings in each moment. Since training in morality considers all the ordinary ways in which we try to live a beneficial and useful life, it is so vast a subject that I couldn't possibly give anything resembling a comprehensive treatment of it here. Some have criticized the first edition of this book for not going deeply enough into the specifics of morality. It is a fair criticism, but I think that it has already been done well in so many other places, such that if you wish to explore the basics of training in morality as approached in the context of Buddhist traditions, I suggest that you check out some of the following works and look around for others that inspire you to take care of yourself and the world around you. Thich Nhat Hanh's For a Future to Be Possible, Sharon Salzberg's A Heart as Wide as the World, and also Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness, Christopher Titmus's Light on Enlightenment, and Jack Kornfield's A Path with Heart. These are excellent resources available online and in books. Those of you who want to get deeper into Buddhist ethics might want to explore the morality practices of both the Theravada and Mahayana trainings. The Mahayana has teaching systems of the mind training or Lojong tradition, which offer very refined practices for developing exceptional kindness and consideration. Those with a taste for more controversial aspects of the Dharma might look towards John Stevens's Lust for Enlightenment, Buddhism and Sex. I personally also look to the works of Dan Savage for many relative aspects of navigating modern adult lay life. Teaching in morality, at its best, is grounded in a theoretical or direct appreciation of one more vital recognition, that of interdependence. Interdependence at this level means an appreciation of the fact that we are all in this together and that we all share the wish to be happy and avoid misery. When we take into consideration our own needs and the needs of those around us, we are more likely to be naturally kind and considerate of others and ourselves. Thus, we try to make it a habit to consider the welfare, feelings, and perspectives of those around us. The obvious potential trap here is to simultaneously fail to consider our own needs, work on balancing both in a way that is sustainable and healthy. Alrighty, one more paragraph I like here, maybe two. There are countless other pitfalls we can run into when training in morality, as mastering our behavior of body, speech, and mind is not easy, especially if we were not raised with particularly helpful role models. I will spend a lot of time in part 2 detailing some of the more common side effects and shadow sides of training in morality, but please understand it is a vast subject. One pitfall that must be addressed here, however, since it is so common, is guilt. We in the West have grown up in a relatively privileged culture in which we can be extremely hard on ourselves, causing ourselves staggering amounts of pain to little good effect. If we can learn to substitute wise remorse, which simply says, well, that didn't work, and that is unfortunate. I will try my best to figure out why and hopefully do something better next time. We will be much better able to train successfully